We're all here tonight for WordPress 7.0. So that's what I'm going to be looking at tonight, but more importantly, which parts of it are likely to matter in a real-world WordPress projects. So we'll cover a handful of major changes, but rather than trying to work through every item in the release note, which some online videos do, they're like 3 hours long, you're pulling your hair out. What I want to do tonight is focus on the things that may influence how we build, manage, and maintain WordPress websites over the next maybe 6 to 12 months. So again, a real kind of focus, narrow focus on that. As always, feel free to drop comments, questions, agreements, disagreements, even into the chat as we go along. There'll be time for a discussion at the end. So let's jump in. I've divided this talk into 4 sections. Section 1 here is one of the themes I've noticed throughout the WordPress 7.0 and kind of before that as well. It's kind of a shift, is that WordPress continues to feel less like a traditional content management system and more like a working application. Now, for a long time, WordPress was primarily a place where you'd log in, you'd create content, you'd publish it, and then you'd log out again. But today, I think more people are spending hours working inside WordPress. Content editors, marketers, site administrators, custom support teams, membership managers, shop managers, the list goes on, business owners as well, often interacting with it through throughout the day. So it's no longer just this place where we're logging in, doing something and logging out. It's becoming more of an editing experience. More that editing experience itself actually matters more than it used to. So small frustrations, confusing interfaces, awkward workflows have a real impact nowadays on productivity, confidence, and support costs. So some of the changes in WordPress 7.0 might seem fairly minor when viewed individually. Things like the admin refresh, improvements in navigation, and workflows, they aren't really headlining grabbing features, but together they continue kind of broader trend towards making WordPress a more polished, more capable, and easier to work with as a day-to-day basis. So let's look at a couple of examples. When people think about website design, they're usually thinking about what visitors see on the front end. But for many WordPress projects, the admin interface is also part of the project, and it's mostly forgotten by a lot of developers, a lot of designers. So think about your clients. They might spend more time inside WordPress admin than they do looking at the public website itself. That's where they create content, update pages, upload images, manage products, create courses, review inquiries, and run different parts of their business. So one of the quieter changes in WordPress 7.0 is the ongoing refinement to the admin experience. So things like improved typography, spacing, visual consistency, and the smooth transitions, they don't sound particularly exciting on paper, but they all contribute to making WordPress feel more modern and more approachable. I know there's a lot of people who don't like the new color scheme, that the blue is a bit jarring, and maybe they're right. But if you actually navigate around the WordPress 7.0 admin interface, for me, it feels a lot fresher, a lot quicker, a lot more responsive, less jarring, I think, to work with. It's a nicer working environment. Now, I'm not suggesting that a new front or a bit of extra white space suddenly transforms productivity, but we have all worked on sites where the admin feels cluttered, inconsistent, overwhelming, full of snags and advertisements. When that happens, clients become very hesitant. They stop exploring the interface. They could become a bit nervous about clicking on things, just in case something breaks. And sometimes they stop updating content and plugins just altogether. On the other hand, when the interface feels clear and predictable, people gain a lot more confidence. That often means fewer support emails, fewer how do I do this type questions. and a smoother handover process overall. So while the admin refresh in WordPress 7 might not be the feature that gets all the headlines, I think that that's an important shift. The editing experience itself is being treated as something worth investigating, not just the content that's produced inside it. One of my USB docks is not behaving properly, so if my mic or video goes out, that's why. I'll try and remember and switch it back on. So if you want to drop something in the chat, where do clients get stuck inside your WordPress? Are they scared of the admin interface, or do they embrace it? Do they end up, not want to touch it because it's all cluttered? Something to think about. Bridget says she likes new subtle transitions. Yes, I do. I like that. And Duncan says the blue is a bit too blue. It is. It's very jarring. People don't like change. That's all right. The second one here, another small change in WordPress 7.0 is the continued expansion of what we call the command palette. It's nothing to do with colors. That's what I thought initially. I was looking for colors, RGB stuff, but it's nothing to do with that. This command palette is now accessible directly from the admin bar. There's a little arrow up there, up the top. There's a little search viewfinder. You can also press Control and K on Windows and Command and K on the Mac, I believe. If you haven't used it before, think of it a bit like a search-driven navigation you see in some modern applications. So instead of clicking through all these multiple menus, you can quickly jump to pages, templates, settings, or other parts of the site just by typing what you're looking for. I've been using this constantly the last couple of weeks since I discovered it. It is fantastic. If you want to jump to shop settings, you just type in shop settings. If you want to jump to users, type users. If you want to jump anywhere at all, pages, posts, comments, you just Control K and type it, and the list comes down, you click on it, and you navigate. Now, the feature itself isn't revolutionary. Most people won't suddenly build websites faster because of the command palette. But what interests me is what it represents. Now, traditionally, WordPress navigation has been menu-driven. You click through layers of navigation until you eventually find the screen you're looking for. And that's fine for occasional users. Remember, we're talking about those people who log in, do stuff, log back out. And that's fine. But it becomes less efficient when you're spending hours a day inside the platform when you're logged in. And now, the command palette reflects like a broader shift towards workflow optimization. It's designed solely for people who regularly work inside WordPress and want to move around more efficiently. It's also interesting because this type of feature is common in more modern applications. I use ClickUp. I've been using ClickUp for a couple of years now. And it's a huge interface. It's a huge platform. And they have a similar thing where you press a keyboard shortcut, you type in where you want, and you just navigate to it. So you don't even have to learn where things are. You just search them. So we're seeing WordPress borrow more ideas from software products that people are actively working in right now, rather than treating it purely as a publishing tool. For freelancers, agencies, power users, small workflow improvements like this can really add up over time. Not because they dramatically change what you do, but because they reduce that friction and make common tasks really easy and faster to perform. So let me know in the chat if you've ever used a command palette before, or you're still mostly clicking through menus, or you haven't discovered it before. Brett says he didn't know about the command palette. We're telling clients about it. It's really good. It's really good. Have a play around later tonight or tomorrow. Okay, last bit for this section, and it's a quick one. One of my favorite developer features in 7.0 is less reliance on JavaScript development. Woohoo! I've never been a strong JavaScript developer. I've never learned like the fundamentals. You know how a few years ago, Matt Mullenweg says, learn JavaScript deeply. I bought the book. I got to like chapter 3 and I was like, nah, snooze fest. So WordPress 7.0, it's introduced something called PHP only block registration. So for simple dynamic blocks only, not complicated ones, but for simple dynamic blocks, you can now build them entirely in PHP using the new register block type function and some parameters. So you don't have to worry about setting up React and downloading NPN and building stuff. It's just another example of WordPress lowering that barrier to be able to extend the platform. So I'm excited to get into that and start creating some new widgets for some of my plugins. It wouldn't be a technology presentation in 2026 if we didn't talk about AI at some point. The interesting thing about WordPress 7.0, though, is it isn't trying to turn WordPress into an AI website builder overnight. Now, there isn't a magic button somewhere that suddenly builds your entire website for you. I'm sure all the freelancers here are thinking, thank goodness for that. But what caught my attention is something much more fundamental. For years, if a plugin developer wanted to add AI features, they typically had to build their own integration. And that meant managing API keys, choosing providers, solving many of the same problems, but in a different way. The result was a growing collection of disconnected AI implementations scattered through the WordPress ecosystem, themes, and plugins. WordPress 7.0, though, it starts moving in a different direction. Instead of treating AI as a feature, it begins treating AI as infrastructure. And that's a huge shift. Something that plugins, themes, and workflows can connect into and through for a more consistent foundation. Now, for most site owners and even many freelancers, that won't change much tomorrow morning, but it could have significant implications over the next few years. Because once AI becomes part of the platform layer, the conversation changes. It's no longer just about generating content or creating images, these features that we can find in some of these other plugins. It becomes a question of how AI fits into business processes. How does it fit into the editorial workflows? How does it fit into customer interactions? How does it fit into website management? So once that AI becomes part of WordPress, it's no longer just generating things. It's actually part of the fundamental platform. And that creates opportunities, but it also creates new decisions, things around privacy, governance, cost, accuracy, and trust. How far will you let AI control your website? How much of the publishing do you want AI to do? So let's look at what WordPress is actually introducing here and why I think it's more important than any individual AI feature that's built on top of it. And some questions: if some other language rather than English for their dashboard, or if they're trying to search English and other languages, all good. I reckon it matches whatever the language you've got in. So language pack that you have installed, it should match that. But I haven't tested that. That's a great question. Something that we should...
Actually, what I mean is like if they are even in the other languages, if they search in English and the menu will still turn it on, showing out, I think that will be logical. And
Yeah,
both actually you can use both languages actually. Yeah.
yeah, that'd be great. I've not tested it, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, Duncan. So one way to think about this is to compare it with how WordPress handles other common services. So imagine if every contact from a plugin had to build its own completely different email system. What about every SEO plugin had its own way of accessing metadata, or every membership plugin had its own user management system that's completely different from WordPress? It'd be messy, it'd be inconsistent, and really difficult to maintain. And that's a little bit like where AI integrations have been over the last couple of years. Many plugins have added AI features, but they've often done so independently. So different setup processes, different WYSIWYGs, different providers, different API key management, different ways of connecting AI services into WordPress. So what WordPress 7.0 starts introducing is a more consistent foundation for that. So rather than every plugin reinventing the wheel, WordPress is beginning to provide a shared infrastructure that can connect to different AI providers through this one common framework. And that's supported in the backend through PHP functions and JavaScript functions as well. For developers, that's potentially a big deal because it reduces duplication and it makes future integrations really easier to build. It also helps users as well because users can connect and then developers can test to see what connections are there and then adapt accordingly. For site owners and freelancers, the benefit is really just simplicity. Instead of configuring AI separately in multiple places, there's this possibility of managing these connections more consistently across the entire platform from one place. The provider agnostic approach as well is really interesting. So rather than WordPress choosing a single AI company, the goal here is to allow different providers to plug in to the same framework. Now, that gives site owners more flexibility, and it helps avoiding kind of locking into the entire ecosystem of like one vendor, which I'm really all for. Now, I don't think most of us are going to rebuild client websites around this particular feature next week, but I do think it's one of the most important, significant architectural changes that WordPress 7.0 is introducing, because it treats AI as a platform capability rather than just a collection of isolated features. And that's why I think it really matters more than any individual AI button or feature that gets added like a plugin. The image here on the left-hand side, just check this monitor. Yep, on the left-hand side, that shows the new connection admin screen. And once you've set up a connection, I put my OpenAI API into that one. Once that's in, then you get a new AI setting, menu setting under settings, and that's the image on the right-hand side. And this is the WordPress experiments. So you can do image generation, and there's different editor experiments that you can switch on, content resizing, and all that sort of stuff. So have a play around with it, but I think this is going to be really, really central to where plugins move to over the next 6 and 12 months. As AI becomes easier to integrate into WordPress, I think the more important conversation probably shifts from capability again to responsibility. In other words, not can we automate this, but should we automate this? One of the consequences of WordPress providing a more consistent AI infrastructure is that we're going to likely see AI appearing in more workflows over time. Content generation, content summaries, customer support, SEO, internal link building, search recommendations, administrative tasks, they're all going to become easier to build and easier to integrate and use with AI. Now that's exciting, but it also creates new decision making. So for example, if AI helps draft a blog post, who is responsible for checking the facts before it goes live? Because we know these damn things lie and they hallucinate. So we can't really just automate the entire process. There needs to be a human involved, and who's meant to do that. So again, this is introducing new decisions for us to make as website developers, as freelancers, as site owners as well. If an AI assists with customer support, for example, what happens when it gives an incorrect advice? Who do you blame? How do you correct that? Another example, if AI analyzes customer data, what information is being shared with external services, and is everyone comfortable with that? And perhaps more importantly, who's paying for it? Because unlike traditional WordPress features, AI services often have ongoing use costs attached to them. So who's paying for that? If you're introducing these AI features natively or within a plugin or within a client sphere, whose credits are going to be used? Yours, your WordPress service level, or clients? So again, different questions are coming out all from this one platform change. For me, the biggest mistake organizations can make is treating AI as a replacement for judgment. The most successful uses of AI that I've seen so far tend to be where AI helps people do their jobs more effectively, rather than attempting to remove people from the process altogether. And that's why I think that these boundaries matter as to where AI starts and where it stops and where humans come in. AI can help create content, but it probably shouldn't be the final editor. AI can assist customer support, but it probably shouldn't be making business critical decisions on its own. AI can help analyze information, but it shouldn't become the unquestioned source of truth. So as WordPress makes AI easier to integrate, and that's great, I think freelancers, agencies, site owners will increasingly need to decide where those boundaries sit for their organizations and for their clients. So here's a question I'm going to drop into chat. Where's chat here? What's one thing on a client website you would never hand over completely to AI? I've got a few in mind. Okay, section number 3. One of the longest running trends in WordPress has been the gradual movement of functionality from plugins to core. Now, that's not new. We've seen it happen before with menus, widgets, the customizer, image handling, and more recently, blocked patterns and site editing capabilities. And WordPress 7.0 continues that trend. What's interesting is that many of the features we're about to look at aren't particularly dramatic on their own, like the admin changes. They won't generate flashy YouTube thumbnails or major conference keynotes on their own. But again, together, they point towards something bigger. Over the years, WordPress ecosystem has become incredibly powerful because plugins can solve pretty much any problem. That's one of WordPress' greatest strengths. At the same time, every plugin adds yet another dependency, another update cycle, another potential compatibility issue, another thing to maintain over the life of a website. Now, I think most freelancers have inherited at least one site where dozens of perfectly reasonable plugin decisions over time eventually turned into a maintenance challenge, if not nightmare. Some of the changes in WordPress 7.0 suggest that core is continuing to absorb more common functionality that previously required additional plugins, custom code, or maybe some workarounds. Now, it doesn't mean that plugins are going away, far from it, but it does raise an interesting question. If WordPress can provide more of these capabilities, these functions natively, what does that mean for site complexity, maintenance, and long-term ownership? Let's look at a few examples. Before we go on that, Steve says, what's one thing you wouldn't let AI do? Admin. Brett says, you wouldn't let AI publish to a live website. Absolutely. Or SEO strategy. Absolutely. Yep. Bridget, yep, no worries. Yep, you can grab the recording. It should be recorded. Okay, let's look at some of these examples of what WordPress core is doing now. So one of the more practical additions in WordPress 7.0 is this visual revisions. I don't know if anyone's played around with it, but most of us are already familiar with traditional revisions in WordPress. We can see who made a change, when they made it, and it compares the underlying content. I'm talking about that kind of diff thing you see with the red and the green that really confuses the bejesus out of me. The whole problem is comparing blocks, markup, text changes doesn't always tell the whole story. Sometimes a client will say something like, the page looked different yesterday, or I changed something, but I can't remember exactly what it was. Or my personal favorite is, I only changed one thing, and then you discover that half the layout is moved and it's completely different. Now, visual revisions, they aim to make this process really easier by allowing changes to be reviewed visually rather than comparing text and block data, which again just confuses me. I don't get I get from a code point of view where you can see changes, but from content and visual, having those reds and green changes, that just confuse me. But this visual revision aims to make this process a lot easier. For content teams and site owners, that's important because I think people think visually. Most users don't care that paragraph block changed from one state to another. They care about the section that moved, the heading that disappeared, or the page that no longer looks the way they expected. Why? So for freelancers and agencies, I think the bigger benefit is confidence. One of the reasons that clients become a bit nervous when editing their own websites is the fear of breaking something, of course, and not being able to recover that. So the easier it is to understand what changed, the easier it is to experiment, review, roll back if necessary. So will visual revisions eliminate every editing problem? Probably not. But it continues that kind of broader trend that we've talked about tonight, is that WordPress is investing more effort into making the editing experience safer, more understandable, more approachable for non-technical users. And that's a good thing. And for many organizations, that can be just as valuable as adding entirely new features. Again, a small change, but visually, and when you're within the editor, it is a big change. At first glance, the new breadcrumbs block and icons block might not seem particularly exciting on their own. In fact, if you've been building WordPress for a while, you might look at them and think, well, haven't we already had ways to do that for many, many years? And the answer is, of course, yes. Lots of plugins. Most WordPress professionals have probably solved both of these problems before, either through plugins like Yoast introduces breadcrumbs, themes, custom code, page builders, other tools. But what interests me isn't the individual features, it's the pattern. So for a long time, WordPress relied heavily on the ecosystem to provide almost everything beyond the basics. So if you need breadcrumbs, you install a plugin. If you need icons, you install a plugin. Need some small piece of functionality, install another plugin. The flexibility is one of WordPress's greatest strengths. So I'm not knocking that, but it can also lead to increasing complexity over time. What WordPress appears to be doing, though, is gradually identifying common functionality that many modern websites, applications need, and is making that available within the platform itself. Now, I'm not suggesting that the new breadcrumb block or icons block is a replacement for all these kind of specialized solutions. There'll always be projects that need more advanced functionality, more options than core delivers you. But for many websites, I think native may be good enough. And that's an important shift. It's an important thinking. Can we just use the native breadcrumbs, or, do we really need to install another plugin just for breadcrumbs that has a different interface, more settings, requires updates, etc.? It kind of shifts that question away from, okay, we'll just install a plugin to do we need to? I think that's a good thing. If a site can achieve that outcome using that capability directly built into WordPress, that potentially means fewer dependencies, simpler maintenance, fewer things that can break over the lifetime of the project. And that's a good thing as well. So while these may seem really small additions, I think they point towards a bigger question that the freelancers and site owners should be asking more often. And that is, do I actually need another plugin for this? Or is WordPress now capable of handling this natively? And is it good enough? We'll see. Historically, many small presentation changes require developer involvement, like hide a section, adjust that menu, change a mobile navigation behavior, control when something appears. Features like visibility control and navigation overlays, they don't just reduce plugins, they shift some of the decision-making closer to the people who are actually managing content. So why should it be up to developers to hide sections? Why can't it be the people who are creating the content? And this is what the WordPress is moving towards. It's interesting because it changes who can safely make changes inside a website. So for site owners, that's more autonomy. They get to change the visibility. They get to change the way that navigation looks. For agencies, it potentially means fewer support requests as well. Why is this thing? I don't want this on mobile. Why is this section here? I only want this section to do. All that goes away when you put that control back into the end users. And for WordPress itself, it's yet another step towards making websites more self-manageable. They control more of that stuff. So that's great. Jonathan asking, is there any way to make my share screen larger? I could do, I don't know how to do that midway, but you can have a look at the recording afterwards. I've decided to do 50-50 tonight. Maybe that was a bad call. I'm not anti-plugin. I make my living because plugins exist. But I think WordPress professionals sometimes underestimate the long-term cost of convenience. A plugin isn't just a feature, it's a dependency, it's a relationship, it's a maintenance obligation. So WordPress 7.0 won't suddenly reduce plugin counts by 50% or anything like that. But it does continue that trend that I think is worth paying attention to as WordPress freelancers, as WordPress site owners. Every year, WordPress handles a little more of itself. And every year, we have one more opportunity to ask, do we still need another dependency for this? So I think it's great that these features are being added into core. There was a time many years ago where people were saying, why isn't this in core? And WordPress automatic foundation stance was, there's a plugin for that. Now it seems they're moving a little bit more to including these core features, which means less dependency on plugins. And that's good, I think, overall. Okay, last section. So far, we've looked at where WordPress 7.0 feels useful and where it points to a larger direction. But I don't want this talk to sound like everything in modern WordPress is neat, finished, and ready for every project, because it isn't. WordPress 7.0 continues several important trends we've talked about tonight: a more polished admin interface, better editing workflows, AI infrastructure at platform level, and more native capabilities in core. But some parts of the modern WordPress story still feel transitional, inbuilt beta version, alpha version even. Some features are generally useful now. Some are groundwork for what comes next, as in the AI layer. And some expected pieces like real-time collab didn't really make it into this release. And I think it's worth talking about these because this is where freelancers and site owners need a bit of judgment. Just because something appears in core doesn't automatically mean it belongs in every client project. And just because WordPress is clearly moving in a particular direction doesn't mean that you again. Here we go. So in this final section, I want to look at what still feels unfinished in WordPress, why that matters, and how we can think about adopting new WordPress features without chasing every shiny object the moment it appears. Okay, so one of the most interesting things about WordPress 7 might actually be something that isn't in it. This real-time collaboration was expected to be part of this release, but it was ultimately delayed. And at first glance, that might seem a bit disappointing. After all, collaborative editing is something that many people have become accustomed to in things like Google Docs, Microsoft 365, Notion, and other modern platforms. Now, the idea sounds straightforward. Multiple people working on content in real time, been done, got the t-shirt. But when you think about how WordPress works, it becomes much more complicated. Just have a think about it. WordPress isn't just editing text. You're not just in a Google Doc. You're not just creating paragraphs. You're editing pages, layouts, blocks, patterns, templates, design settings, navigation structures. Sometimes the content is being managed by multiple plugins at the same time. So when two people edit a WordPress page, they're often changing much more than just words on a screen, potentially changing structure, design, functionality, and presentation all at the same time. And that's why I don't see delay as a failure. I see it as a reminder that some of the most valuable improvements are also the hardest to get right. But what's encouraging isn't the feature wasn't removed because collaboration isn't important. It was delayed because the community wasn't satisfied that it was ready. So that actually gives me a lot of confidence that they're not shipping something that's broken or half ready. They have, the right to pull it and work on it more until it is more polished. Now, personally, I'd rather see a feature arrive later and work properly than arrive early and create problems for site owners and content teams and raise lots of support issues. I don't want that. For me, the bigger takeaway is that collaboration is clearly part of WordPress's future direction. We know that it's part of that Gutenberg overall project, the direction that WordPress is going. So if anything, it highlights just how difficult it is to bring modern collaborative workflows into a platform as flexible and as complex as WordPress. So sometimes a delayed feature tells us as much about the future than the actual features that ship. And I have a big question here that I've been asking everyone on LinkedIn and Twitter. I'll pop it down. Would real-time collaboration actually change the way that you work in WordPress? Would you use it, basically? I'm not 100% sure I would. One of the challenges with modern WordPress is that we are all talking about the same platform, but we're often working in very different versions of it. Now, you can build a brand new site today using blocks, patterns, global styles, and the site editor, and many of the newer capabilities that have emerged over the last couple of years. Then tomorrow, you might log into a client website that was built 5 years ago, and found a completely different experience. Classic themes, legacy plugins, custom page builders, old workflows, maybe even the classic editor. And that's before we even start looking at custom code and third-party integrations. Now, what WordPress 7.0 continues to do through things like iframed editor and ongoing editor improvements is move that platform forward, but in a more consistent editing experience. But we're still in that kind of transition period. The reality is that multiple generations of WordPress users coexist at the same time. Some sites are largely modern, some are largely legacy, most kind of sit somewhere in between. They kind of use a bit of classic stuff, a bit of widgets, maybe some blocks. And I think that's important to recognize because it affects almost every aspect of our work as freelancers and site owners. Real-time collab. Brett says, no, he don't see himself using real-time. Alan says, is a real-time collaboration for end users or admins? That's a good question. We're not really sure. So talking about this WordPress platform as, contains multiple worlds, it affects how we can confidently adopt new capabilities. It affects client training, it affects handovers, maintenance, plugin choices, that whole sort of thing. Are we sitting in classic WordPress? Are we sitting in modern WordPress? Are we sitting in this kind of hybrid area in the middle? A feature that makes perfect sense for a new build might be completely inappropriate for an older client site that's been running successfully for years and years. And that's why I think human judgment is still important. In fact, it's more important, not less. WordPress gives us more options every year. The challenge is deciding what options make sense for a particular project, a particular client, and a particular stage of that site's life cycle. It's not just use all the shiny things all the time. Because modern WordPress isn't just this one environment. It's several different worlds all kind of overlapping at the same time. I want to finish this section with what I think is one of the most important lessons for freelancers, agencies, site owners, us. Useful does not always mean ready. One of the strengths of WordPress, the project, is that it continually evolves. New ideas appear, new workflows emerge, the platform keeps moving forward. But there's a difference between feature being available and a feature being appropriate for a particular project. We've talked tonight about AI infrastructure, visual revisions, editor improvements, block capability in PHP, collaboration, a range of other things in WordPress 7.0. And some of those things I'd happily start exploring today, like the command palette. I love it. Other things, though, I'd probably watch a little bit more closely, approach it more cautiously, and definitely in production environments. And that's completely normal. As professionals, our job isn't to adopt every new shiny feature the moment it appears. Our job is to evaluate risk, suitability, and long-term impact for the client, for the site, and for us as well, as ongoing maintainers. For example, the brand new website project gives you more freedom to experiment than a business-critical website serving customers every day. Likewise, a technically confident content team may be quite comfortable trying new workflows, while another organization might value stability and predictability above everything else. I've certainly worked with many of those types of clients, and neither approach is wrong. The mistake is assuming that newer automatically means better, and it doesn't really. It's just different. I think the most valuable skills modern WordPress devs is learning to separate direction from readiness. So you can recognize where WordPress is heading, and I think it's good that we all talk about these things and the features and have a think about where WordPress is heading. You can be excited about new capabilities. I am. And you can even start experiment with them, but you don't necessarily have to deploy them into every client project immediately. And that's why I think many of these WordPress 7.0 are more signals, signals about where the platform is going, signals about what might be normal over the next few years and where we're going. But as always, good judgment matters more than feature checklists. The goal isn't to use the newest shiny thing. The goal is to choose the right thing for the project in front of you. So a couple of things as we wrap up. If I had to pick just a few things to keep my eye on over the next 12 months, these would probably be at the top of my list. The first AI, of course. Moving from novelty, like generating images, change contents, more into workflow, actually being part of the workflow process of the WordPress platform. I think we're moving beyond the stage where AI is simply a feature that people experiment with because it's interesting. The more important question is where AI generally improves workflows and where human judgment still needs to remain in that process. The second is that WordPress is continuing to absorb more common functionality into the core. We've seen this trend for years now, and WordPress 7.0 continues that. I don't expect plugins become less important, but I do think we'll continue asking not what plugin can solve this, but does WordPress already have enough of this natively? And finally, I think the admin and the editor experience is becoming increasingly more important part of the WordPress project. For a long time, many projects have focused entirely on the public-facing part of the website, pages and posts and how that renders. But clients, editors, marketers, site administrators, they spend a lot more time inside WordPress. A fast, intuitive, confidence-building editing experience can be just as valuable as a beautiful front end. So when I look at WordPress 7.0 overall, I don't see the release being defined by a single breakthrough feature. What I see is a platform continuing to mature and evolve. A platform that's becoming more capable, more integrated, and increasingly more focused on workflows rather than simply just publishing content, which is how it evolved. And while not every feature is ready for the project, I think the direction of travel is becoming clearer. And that's what I probably watch over the next year. Where's WordPress going? So that's my take on WordPress 7.0. I'm wondering what features stood out for you, but I do have one more slide. I put this in just last minute. So I noticed that the call for volunteer contributors for WordPress 7.1 has just been announced today or maybe late yesterday. And some features and ideas are already in the works. So here's what I'll be watching for in 7.1. Real-time collaboration. If this lands successfully, it could be one of the biggest workflow changes that WordPress has ever seen in many, many years, especially for editorial teams, marketing teams, enterprise users, agencies, that sort of stuff. Or it could be a dead weight that most people never use. Who knows? Native content types. So potentially huge, not because it replaces ACF with SCF, but because it changes expectations around structured content in WordPress. Today, structured content is often viewed as something developers add to WordPress. So posts and pages, everyone knows about that, but testimonials and customer profiles and all that sort of stuff, that's something that if a customer would want, they come to a developer and we'd implement. If native content types land successfully, then structured content may start being seen as a standard part of WordPress itself. So how does everyone feel about that? Yeah, SCF. Notice I got my little bit in there. The next one is Abilities API. So today, most WordPress AI tools focus on content creation. So content as in word content and image creation. There is something called a proposed Abilities, AI Abilities API that could allow AI assistants to better understand the site's environment and safely interact with parts of the WordPress through a standard framework. So it's about exposing WordPress capabilities and context to AI systems in a structured and controlled way. This shifts AI from a content generation towards real site awareness, workflow assistance, and operational support. So I know we've got the capabilities API. We're kind of talking about that, but just for AI. So AI knows what your website is. It understands what context it is. And dashboard modernization. So Gutenberg experiments. If you install the Gutenberg plugin, it's got a whole list of experiments. One of them is the new admin design experiments. So that's been appearing in that plugin. They're exploring more flexible workspace style admin layouts and modern dashboard experiences. So think about no longer just having the dashboard and you can choose columns and snap widgets, but you can actually define that area into grids or flex and you can add whatever components in that you need. And again, it's that shift of WordPress project is realizing that people are spending more time within the WordPress dashboard and being able to customize that more like you see in modern applications. So whether these features ship in 7.1 or slip out to later releases, they all point in the same direction that we discussed tonight. WordPress is spending less effort on publishing content. It's got that, it can do that, and more effort on improving that experience of managing, editing, collaborating, and working inside the platform. And I think we'll see that shift solidify in the WordPress 7 versions throughout the next couple of years. Okay, it's time for Q&A. I'm going to flip through some of the stuff that we've been talking about tonight in the chat. Here's a few other discussion prompts. Has anything tonight's talk piqued your interest? Add your thoughts, questions in the chat, or you can cam and mic up and discuss them in person. And just a quick reminder, next month, what clients actually break on websites. I'll be talking about that. Okay, let's get rid of the share.